The first scream echoed through the concrete halls of Silivri Prison just moments after the lights went out. It wasn't the ordinary kind of scream that came from fear or anger. This one sounded like someone discovering a truth so shocking that their voice couldn't contain it. Guards rushed toward Block F, keys rattling, boots pounding. But when they reached the cell where political prisoners were kept, something was terribly wrong. The cell door was wide open even though no one had unlocked it. Papers were scattered everywhere, court documents, letters, notes that prisoners had secretly written to international reporters. And on the wall, drawn with something that looked like burnt plastic, were the words, "The trials are a lie." Before the guards could react, another scream came from deeper inside the block. Someone shouted for help. Someone else begged for the truth not to be taken away again. The officers stepped back, confused and scared. Silivri was supposed to be the most secure prison in the world. Nothing like this was ever meant to happen inside its walls. But tonight, the prison had been exposed from the inside. What the guards found next would change everything. And nobody knew whether the truth had finally escaped or whether it had just been silenced forever. Now, the story begins long before that terrifying night. Silivri Prison, sitting on the outskirts of Istanbul, looked more like a military fortress than a correctional facility. It stretched across massive land, with tall watchtowers and endless layers of barbed wire. People in America would compare it to the size of a small city. To most of the world, Silivri was just a name they heard in news headlines. But to the people inside, it was a place where hope could disappear faster than morning fog. One of the newest inmates was Daniel Carter, an American documentary journalist who had been arrested while filming a story about political prisoners in Turkey. Daniel wasn't a spy. He wasn't trying to cause trouble. He just wanted the truth for his viewers, for the world, and for the people whose voices couldn't reach outside the prison gates. But that was exactly why he was dangerous. When Daniel arrived, 2 guards escorted him through the main corridor. The hallway smelled like metal and damp stone. He tried to count the cells as he walked, but there were too many. Every block looked the same, gray, silent, endless. Some prisoners watched him through the bars, eyes empty but curious. Others kept their heads down, not wanting to be noticed. "You speak when spoken to," one guard warned him. "You look at no one. You cause no problems, and you will survive here." Daniel didn't answer. His hands were cuffed too tightly, and his mind was spinning. He had heard stories about Silivri, overcrowded cells, prisoners kept inside during trials, journalists treated like enemies. But seeing it up close made everything feel heavier, like an invisible weight settling on his chest. His cell was small, barely big enough for 2 people. A thin mattress lay on a metal frame, and a single light bulb flickered above. Inside was another prisoner, a man in his 40s with calm eyes and a quiet posture. His name was Michael Turner, a teacher from Ohio who had been accused of supporting dissidents after sharing articles online. "You're American too," Michael said softly. "Then you need to be careful. The walls here, they listen." Daniel sat down on the mattress, trying to understand what that meant. But he didn't have long to think. That night, he heard his first Silivri trial. Trials inside the prison were nothing like real courtrooms. There were no crowds, no journalists, no open doors. Just a small room with judges, soldiers, and a prisoner who was barely allowed to speak. The walls were thick, but the fear traveled through them like cold air. Michael explained everything in whispers. How political prisoners often waited months or years. How accusations were vague but punishments harsh. How the overcrowding made life feel like a ticking clock. Yet, Daniel noticed something else. Notes hidden under mattresses. Whispers exchanged through vents. Small pieces of truth being passed around like treasure. The prisoners weren't silent. They were planning something. And one night, Daniel followed Michael down a narrow maintenance hallway where prisoners secretly gathered. They had documents, evidence, stories that the world needed to hear. But just when Daniel finally saw what they were trying to expose, the sound of boots thundered toward them, growing louder, faster, impossible to outrun. An extreme event was about to erupt inside Silivri Prison, and it would change everything. The boots hit the ground like approaching thunder, shaking the narrow hallway where Daniel and Michael stood frozen. The prisoners around them shoved papers back into pockets, hid evidence under loose floor tiles, and scattered toward every dark corner they could find. Someone whispered, "They're coming from both sides," and the panic in his voice made Daniel's stomach twist. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in. A guard shouted for everyone to stop. Another yelled for backup. Flashlights cut through the darkness, landing on Daniel's face. For a second, he couldn't breathe. Then everything exploded into chaos. One prisoner pushed Daniel aside just as a guard swung a baton. Another inmate tripped over a broken pipe and fell, knocking down two others. Michael grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him behind a metal panel that led into a storage crawlspace. They slipped inside just before a beam of light passed over the spot where they had been standing. "Stay quiet," Michael whispered. Through the small holes in the panel, Daniel watched as guards tackled prisoners, forcing them to the floor. Papers scattered everywhere, notes about unfair trials, reports of overcrowding, lists of journalists who had disappeared inside Silivri. One guard noticed the papers and froze. His face went pale. "Where did this come from?" he barked. No one answered. The guard grabbed a prisoner at random and dragged him toward the hallway exit. "Someone is getting punished for this," he growled. Daniel felt sick. He had come to document the truth, not watch innocent people get hurt for holding it. When the guards finally left, dragging two men with them, the hallway fell silent again. Only the dim emergency lights hummed overhead. Michael waited a long moment before pushing the panel open. "That was close," Michael said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Too close." Daniel tried to steady his breathing. "You didn't tell me it was this dangerous." Michael gave a sad smile. "If I told you everything, you wouldn't have come." Slowly, the remaining prisoners crept out from hiding. Some were shaken. Some were angry. All were exhausted. "We can't keep the evidence here anymore," one man said. "They're watching this block too closely." "We'll move it," another replied. "There's an old generator room nobody checks. We can hide everything there." Daniel listened as they planned their next steps. The prisoners weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for every journalist, activist, and innocent person trapped inside Silivri. They wanted the world to see what was happening. The next morning, silence hung over the cell blocks like a thick fog. The prisoners who had been taken the night before hadn't returned. Guards walked faster than usual, speaking quietly among themselves. Something fell off. Daniel and Michael joined the others in the courtyard during roll call. The bright sunlight made everything look normal, but the tension in the air told a different story. A guard shouted for everyone to face forward. Several prisoners exchanged nervous glances. "Something happened last night," one whispered. "Something bigger than a simple search." Daniel tried to hear more, but the guards kept pacing the courtyard, watching everyone closely. After roll call, they were forced back into their cells early. The hallways were unusually quiet. No sound from the kitchens. No sound from the workshops. Even the ventilation fans seemed slower, like the prison was holding its breath. Then, during the afternoon, the loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention! All prisoners will remain in their cells. No movement allowed. This is for security reasons." Michael leaned against the wall, frowning. "They're hiding something." Daniel felt that same heavy pressure in his chest. "Do you think it's about the papers?" "Maybe," Michael said. "Or maybe they found something worse." Hours passed. The guards didn't bring dinner. They didn't call for recreation. They didn't unlock any doors. The sun went down, and still the prison stayed silent. Then it happened. A deep rumble shook the entire block, followed by a loud crash so strong it made dust fall from a ceiling. Daniel jumped to his feet. What was that? Michael's eyes widened as another crash echoed through the prison, louder this time. It sounded like a door or a wall being destroyed. Prisoners began shouting from their cells, some in fear, some in confusion, some in hope, because the sound came from the direction of the trial rooms. The same rooms where political hearings were held. The same rooms where prisoners were silenced. The same rooms where evidence was locked away. Something massive had just happened inside Silivri Prison, and Daniel realized, with a chill running down his spine, that whatever it wasn't an accident. The extreme event had begun, and nothing inside the world's largest prison would ever be the same. The crashes grew louder, deep, booming hits that spread through the concrete like thunder, shaking the entire prison. Daniel grabbed the cell bars and tried to see down the hallway, but everything was dim and blurry. Prisoners shouted for answers, guards yelled back, and somewhere far off, an alarm began to wail, rising higher and higher until it felt like the whole building was screaming. "What's happening?" Daniel asked, his heart racing. Michael had gone pale. "Those sounds, that's coming from the political trial wing. Something serious is going on." Before Daniel could respond, the hallway lights flickered, turned white hot for a split second, then shut off entirely. The block fell into darkness. For several seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Then the emergency red light snapped on, bathing everything in a bloody glow. That was when they heard it, voices. Dozens of them. Rushing, shouting, panicking. And then a single sound rose above them all, a scream of pure terror. "Help. Somebody please." Daniel felt every hair on his neck stand up. Moments later, guards sprinted past their cell, carrying flashlights and shields. One of them radioed in, shouting, "The wall's been breached. I repeat, there's a breach inside the trial block." A breach? Inside Silivri? That was impossible. Michael stared at Daniel, stunned. This prison is built like a fortress. How does a wall just break? Daniel didn't have an answer. But he knew one thing. Whatever had happened wasn't natural. The entire block was shaking from the chaos outside. More guards ran past. Prisoners pounded on doors, asking questions no one would answer. Then, suddenly, the alarms cut out. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. A heavy clank echoed through the block. The cell doors didn't open, but something else did. Somewhere deep inside the prison, a massive metal gate moved, slowly, painfully, like it hadn't been touched in years. Daniel heard it. Michael heard it. Everyone heard it. "What is that?" Daniel whispered. "The old transport sector," Michael said. "They stopped using it years ago. Why would it open now?" Michael shook his head. "I don't know. But this isn't normal." Minutes passed with no movement, no explanation. The only sound was the distant thump of helicopters approaching overhead. Their blades chopped through the night air, getting louder and louder until the whole prison vibrated. "Military," Michael muttered. "They're sending the military." Daniel's stomach twisted. If the military was coming, then the government believed something extremely dangerous had happened inside. Then, without warning, the loudspeaker buzzed alive again. A voice, cold, stern, trembling slightly, spoke through the crackling static. "Attention. A critical security incident has occurred. All guards proceed to the trial wing. All prisoners remain silent. Anyone attempting to move will be restrained." It clicked off, but they heard something the voice didn't mean to broadcast, a faint sound behind the announcement. A sound that made every prisoner freeze. Crying. Someone on the other end was crying. Daniel exchanged a horrified look with Michael. Something's gone very, very wrong. A few minutes later, footsteps approached. Not hurried like before, slow, careful, almost nervous. A single guard walked down the hallway, shining a flashlight into each cell. When he reached Daniel and Michael, he stopped. "You too," he said quietly. "Back away from the door." Michael moved first, raising his hands. Daniel stepped back too, watching the guard closely. The guard leaned in, lowering his voice. "Whatever you heard tonight, forget it. For your own good." Daniel frowned. "What happened in the trial rooms?" The guard didn't answer. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, lowered his voice even more, and whispered. "They found something behind the wall. Something none of us were supposed to see." Daniel felt ice crawl down his spine. "Found what?" The guard opened his mouth to answer. But before he could speak, another explosion rocked the prison. So violent that dust rained from the ceiling, lights burst, and the entire block plunged into darkness again. Prisoners screamed. Guards shouted. Something Something massive had just happened in the heart of Silivri. And this time, it wasn't just a wall or a door. Something far worse had broken open. The truth was no longer hidden, and the world's largest prison was about to reveal its darkest secret.